Welcome back. Last time we discussed the definition of kalam as providing a rational defense for the tenets of the faith, like the outer wall of a fortress. Of course, all schools of kalam are attempting to defend tawheed, otherwise they wouldn't be Islamic. For example, the Mu'tazilites, the first school of kalam we read about, were known as Ahl al-Tawheed wal-Adl, the people of tawheed and divine justice, which were the first two of the five principles they were known for. But don't all Muslims assert tawheed and divine justice? The key is that the Mu'tazilites interpreted this in a different way than most Muslims, and they reached different conclusions in defending tawheed. Let's start with tawheed. The Mu'tazilites wanted to prevent at all costs the unity of God from being in any way defiled by any form of multiplicity or duality, as did all of Islam. But they carried this to an extreme. Mu'tazilite theologians pointed to certain verses in the Quran such as, "The hand of God is above their hand, Yad Allah fawqa aydihim," or the Quranic verse, "God is the knower, the seer, and hearer." That means that God therefore sees. He's al-Basir. He hears. He's as-Sami'. What is meant by these statements? The Mu'tazilites, in order to avoid the danger of anthropomorphism, of people thinking that God hears in the way we hear, or he sees in the way that we see, and anthropomorphizing God, the Mu'tazilites said that the human mind simply cannot understand what these sentences mean. That is the doctrine of ta'til in Arabic. That is, in a sense, the mind going on vacation. Now, it's important to point out that the Mu'tazilites were also reacting against groups of people who in fact went to the other extreme and thought that God's hand was simply a big hand and God's throne was like a big stool and so forth. Pure anthropomorphism. In order to avoid that, they went to the other extreme. Remember from our earlier readings the terms tanzih and tashbih, that is, transcendence and immanence, or the pure otherness of God and the analogy of things with God. As you recall, tanzih means to be purified from all limitation, from all that one can say. It's pure transcendence. Now the Mu'tazilites went to the extreme position of pure tanzih, saying that God is pure unity, and we cannot understand the names of God, thus eliminating the pole of tashbih. While this preserves and safeguards the unity of God, it also cuts us off from Him. First of all, when we read the Quran, there's Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim at the beginning of every surah. In the name of God, the most merciful and compassionate. What does Rahman mean? The Mu'tazilites say we can't know. What does Rahim mean? We don't know. We're just reading what we don't know. And so this position has the danger of becoming a kind of deistic philosophy. And the living aspect of religion cannot be nourished by it, because we appeal to God through His names. God is for us forgiving, merciful, compassionate, and so forth. But because the Mu'tazilites emphasize so much this principle of tawheed in the sense of tanzih, absolute transcendence without our being able to say anything at all about the divine nature, they were oftentimes called the people of unity. Now, it's against this background that we must understand the rise of the next important school of kalam associated with the name of Al-Hasan al-Ash'ari. He was himself originally a Mu'tazilite. According to him, in the year 300 of the Hijrah, in the 10th Christian century, he had a dream of the Prophet, who told him, "Ya Abul Hasan, you must change your ways and try to save the Aqidah, that is, the credo of my community. And you must set yourself against what these Mu'tazilites are saying." As a result of that dream, he had a kind of conversion, and he began to espouse a new theological school, or perspective, against the Mu'tazilites. With respect to God's names and qualities, Al-Ash'ari asserted that it's not simply a matter of tanzih or tashbih, but the truth is between the two. That is, the divine names are in fact understandable by us, but they're not simply anthropomorphic. While God sees, and the word see, S-E-E, has a meaning to us because it has some correspondence to what we know of the word to see, it's not exactly the same thing. Great teachers are able to teach very difficult things in very easy ways. Seyyed Hossein Nasr asked one of his traditional teachers about this extremely difficult issue, and he said, "It's very easy. God's qualities you can understand by taking their corresponding human quality and removing from it all the limitations which are bound to it. That's the answer. That is, for example, God sees. Now we see also, but our seeing is conditional upon our eyes. They must be open, and we should not be blind. It's conditional upon light. We cannot see in a dark room. It's conditional upon an object which must be in the same space as us. I cannot see right now what's going on in the kitchen in Peking. So there has to be contiguity. And also synchronicity. That is, the time has to be the same. I can see you in an 11 o'clock class because not only are we both in the same room, the same space, we're in the room at the same time. If I were standing there at 10:30 rather than 11:30, you would not be there. So there are conditions which are bound to all of our senses of the various faculties. Now, if you take all of those conditions away, what remains is divine seeing. If you really think about that, it solves a very complicated and difficult issue. I'm mentioning it to you in order for you to know the issue, not to know the answers necessarily. El-Ansary was very, very adamant on bringing back the significance of the divine names, which are the keys in Islam for the approach to God. And therefore, this became much more acceptable to the community at large, to the community of faith, the Ummah. And so the teachings of El-Ansary spread very rapidly, and his name became associated with the second important school called the Ash'arites, which has dominated Sunni theology by far for the last 1,000 years. And most Islamic philosophers and mystics, despite their differences on other theological questions, agreed with the Ash'arites on the reality of a middle way conception of God, which recognizes a carefully maintained balance between God's transcendence and immanence in order to understand properly the meaning and nature of God's divine names and qualities. This concludes our discussion of the debates between the Mu'tazilites and Ash'arites on the divine names and qualities. Next time, we'll turn to the implications of this for the debate over the created versus uncreated nature of the Quran.